So thanks to Steve Akers for filling in while I was gone last week. Just a reminder of kind of some of the big thoughts that we are broad concepts and ideas that we've been looking at through this section. This section of David's life is a more complicated section. It's there are a lot of things in there that leave you asking questions and wondering about things, and so there is it's a good study in humanity is the way that I think of it. This is a time period where we get to see a lot of the humanity of David. We get to see his spiritual growth, which is interesting because if you look at David's spiritual growth, I think the David that we find the easiest to connect with as being faithful to God is you go back to like David versus Goliath. And you look at him and you say, well, that guy's got it, right? Here's Goliath saying, I'll stand up against, bring me your best and I'll destroy the army of Jehovah. And David walks out and he goes, well, why isn't anybody fighting this guy? And his just clear path to do what is right. It's easy to look at that guy and say, that's the guy that I'm really impressed with. When you get to this section of David's life, I think you're dealing with a more well-rounded and complete David, but it's harder to see. But one way to think about it, and Steve and I were talking about this, one way to think about it is, if you look at Solomon, when Solomon's going to become king, and he's going to have David talk to him about what kind of a man he should be. Which David do you want talking to him? Do you want the young David back in David and Goliath day, or the David who's learned all the lessons and is on the other side, the old man? I think the old man's the guy you want talking to him. But that guy has been through some garbage, and he's made some bad choices, and he's learned some things from that. And so as we look at David, we have to keep in mind that some of the things that he's learning right now are lessons that take you through the valley of the shadow of death, to quote David, by the way. And so he's been through a lot of those things. So as we progress, Absalom has come in and he has taken Jerusalem, is where we'll really pick up. And that'll be about the end of chapter 16. David has fled with all his household. He's had people cursing him along the way. He's had some friends offer to go with him that he's asked to stay behind. Some friends that have offered to go with him that he has said please and thank you. He's had people meet him along the way that bring comfort and care, food, provisions to his family. And on top of that, one of the things that happened was that the ark was brought out with, we'll take that with us. David says no to that. I think one of the things we should factor in is that David has learned the lessons of Eli's two sons. We don't just take the ark to go do our bidding. It is not a talisman. And so David understands this idea. He says, if God wants me to come back to the ark, I'll come back to the ark. But the ark doesn't move, David moves. And so all of that happens, and then you get to about verse 15 of chapter 16, and it says, Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, entered Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. So there will be a series of events that happen. One of those being that Ahithophel gives Absalom the advice to lay with all of the concubines who've been left behind to care for the house, and to pitch a tent on the roof, and to do it openly in front of everybody. This is fulfilling of a prophecy that God had made, that the things that David had done in private. You might remember, where was David first when he first saw Bathsheba? He's in his castle on the roof, right? He's up there where he's got a view. Now it's reversed, and you have Ahithophel giving this advice to Absalom to do this publicly, and that is a fulfillment of that prophecy. So part of what is happening here is just purely based off of the fact that God had said that it would happen. But as we look at Absalom, he's going to end up getting advice for what to do next. He'll get advice from Ahithophel. We've mentioned before, Ahithophel is likely Bathsheba's grandfather. So that family connection is a factor, something to consider. It complicates things. But I will tell you, as you look at the people here, you can start looking at genealogies, and a lot of people are related to a lot of other people. And so that there are these kind of family connections. And then he'll also get advice from Hushai. Ahithophel will say, go right now, give me some men, we'll track him down while they're weak and weary, and we'll defeat David right now. That advice is good advice. That's in terms of winning the war, it's good advice. If Absalom had followed Ahithophel's advice, everything looks very different. Instead, he's going to follow Hushai's advice, who is a friend of David who is sent back as a plant. He gives that advice on purpose as a way to thwart the plans of Absalom. But as we look at Absalom and all of these things going on here, from the laying with the concubines in public to the tracking down, do I track him down and destroy him tonight, or do I gather all the armies and track him down tomorrow or next week? You want to remember, who's Absalom tracking down? It's his dad. It's not, it's the king, it's his father. This is a very complicated relationship. That as you're looking at Absalom, early on, as you look at Absalom's life, and when we're first introduced to him, I view him personally, maybe you don't, but I look at him as a very, a figure that I can have compassion for. Because how are we introduced to Absalom? Why does Absalom even show up in the picture at all? It's his sister. Yeah, it says Tamar, right? He has this sense of vengeance and justice for his sister. We know he loves his sister. Remember how he even names his own daughter after her? So you can look at him, but this is where I ask the question, what's at the core of his character? We're introduced to him because of a lack of justice, and so he steps up to do something about that. That's something I can have compassion for or understand, right? How I'm sure all of us at some point in time have seen something unjust happen and felt that it should be righted. But by the time you get to Absalom here at this stage, where he's chasing his father, or prepared to chase his father down in the middle of the night, if he follows Ahithophel's advice, where he's laying with his father's concubines in public, he's less. It's less likely that you're going to feel compassion for him at that point. Is that fair to say that, like, early on, Absalom, it's like I can kind of see, but this Absalom, by the time you get to the end of chapter 16, how many of us see him as a good guy at this point? Right? At this point, yeah, that's exactly right. And I would argue that that is because the one thing we're introduced to with him, why does he show up on the scene? What's the one thing he cares about? Revenge becomes the thing that is his whole life. That becomes his character. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. It's not enough to end Amnon, which he does, but then after you end Amnon, who's next in the chain? Right? And the problem with vengeance is it is that bully in the schoolyard that keeps moving the line, right? And so now you're always chasing vengeance. And what does God say about vengeance? Belongs to him. There's a reason for it. If you think vengeance belongs to you, you become Absalom. It's not meant to be that way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That is an interesting distinction between David and Absalom, right? David, at the point we're reading here, David is the Lord's anointed, right? He's the one that God anointed to become king. And when Saul was the Lord's anointed, David would not remove his head, right? Even though he had chances. He said, that's not my job, that's God's job. Absalom's saying the opposite. He's saying, I'm making it my job. Did I see a comment? Yeah. That's interesting. He isn't actually a leader. It's more about, it's all a means to an end, right? Ahithophel, how do I take the city? How do I properly destroy my father? You're right. He himself is not really leading as much as just being driven by what will help me get to my end goal, which is not leadership. That's a great point. Oh yeah. No doubt about it. There's no appealing to the Lord. Bill, did I see your hand? Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, and it's like this combination of two things, right? Bad company corrupts good morals, and also we tend to seek out, now this isn't a biblical saying, but it's kind of an axiom, as birds of a feather flock together. You seek out people who are of your type, and if you become a revenge type, these two have paired each other together, and it's never good enough, right? And they're never satisfied. That's a great point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. That's a huge point. Great point, because you're right. This all starts from a place that we could find reasonable. I understand Absalom being upset. If I were Absalom, I would have lost my mind with how upset I was over what was done to Tamar. But the vengeance becomes so blinding that it twists him to do the very thing tenfold over that he was mad about in the first place. Great point. Great point. Okay, so now we move on to the other character we talked about a little bit, and dovetails what drives out Ahithophel. And I think Bill already kind of addressed this. What's driving him? Vengeance, right? You have this same type of vengeance with him that you have with Absalom. And one way that you know that is his whole life is leading up to one thing: killing David. And that's specifically what his advice is, by the way, is send me with I'm going to say a platoon of men, but just send me with a group of men. We'll chase him down tonight, and I will strike down the king alone. That's what he says. I'll strike down the king alone. No more bloodshed, just the king alone. So what does Ahithophel want? He wants one person's blood. Now, I can understand some of it. Again, like, at the root of revenge is typically there's something that's somewhat understandable, some wrong that was done to you that is not just, it's not fair. But what do we tell all of our kids, by the way? Life isn't fair, right? You've got to learn to give vengeance to God, because life is not going to be fair, and there are going to be a lot of people in your life that get away with stuff they shouldn't. But oh, by the way, you're going to get away with a lot of stuff you shouldn't too. And so Ahithophel is driven by this, and the way we know it's the driving force is when he doesn't get it, what does he do? He kills himself. Literally, my life is not worth living if I cannot have this thing. Right? It is all-consuming. And one of the, I think, important messages of this season of David's life is this revenge story, this vengeance story, and how wrong it goes. David is hurt and damaged by it. Yes, the kingdom is hurt and damaged by it, but who is most damaged by it? Absalom and Ahithophel. What do their lives amount to? I mean, in the history of the Bible, these guys, the story of them has no happy ending. So they are the greatest victims of their own vengeance. And it is a reminder to us that bitterness is a root that if it springs up causes all sorts of trouble, to use the New Testament phraseology of it. Right? Be very careful about becoming bitter at some unfairness that happens in your life, no matter how big that unfairness is, right? Because, I mean, again, with both Ahithophel and with Absalom, the injustices in their life are not small things. Ahithophel's injustice is somebody killed his grandson-in-law and took his granddaughter as wife after laying with her. That is not a small injustice. And the injustice to Absalom is the violation of his sister. That is not a small injustice. So we're not talking about you got a parking ticket and you didn't deserve it, right? These are big things. But if you let it define you, it will wreck your life. You've got to let it go. And that's why I truly think one of the things about vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I always say it the King James Version way. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I don't know why I can't say it any way other than King James. But is a gift to us. That we don't have to be the avengers. Because if we are, it will destroy you. It will absolutely destroy you. And as you mentioned with Absalom, it's never enough. Like it's from one guy to the next to the next. Okay, next, Absalom gets this advice from Ahithophel, and then he gets the advice from Hushai. Why? This one's a simple one, because the answer is in the text. Why does he listen to Hushai and not to Ahithophel? It'll tell you right in the text. You go to chapter 17 and go down to verse 14. It says, Then Absalom and all the men of Israel said, The counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel, for the Lord had ordained to thwart the good counsel of Ahithophel so that the Lord might bring calamity on Absalom. Why does Absalom listen to one advice and not the other? Because God. That's why. Proverbs talks about the idea of the way or the mind or the heart of a king being like water in the hands of the Lord. He can just do whatever he wants with it. We see that throughout history. One of my favorite is King Cyrus, who is prophesied about, and God says, I know him by name, though he knows not me. And God uses Cyrus to bring the Israelites back from captivity, and he's a tool in the hands of God, and yet Cyrus never knows Jehovah. God does whatever he wants. And so in this case, Absalom is trying to take the role of king of God's kingdom, but he's never been anointed. He's never been picked for that role. David has. And so he's going to fail because God has ordained it as such. Okay. Now, from there, they take Hushai's advice, and you'll notice I'm going at a little bit quicker clip here. So if there's something that you see in there, you say, hey, I'd like to talk about this, I have a question or something, Steve will answer it. But I watched Steve's class too. As Hushai gives advice, they wait. And so then what ends up happening is there comes a time where they're going to have to go out into battle, and David is ready to do that. David is prepared to go out into battle. And if you look down in chapter 17, and by the way, I might mention one small detail here in chapter 17, verse 25. Absalom will set Amasa over his army. So Joab has been the commander of the army, but now that Absalom's in charge, he puts Amasa. That will come to be a factor later on. And then, let's see here, chapter 18, David numbered the people who were with him, set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David sent the people out, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai, that is Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. And if you remember, Ittai is the guy, it's like he kind of showed up and it's like his first day of work, and oh, by the way, we're having to flee. And he's the guy who still says, no, I'll stick with you, David. And the king said to the people, I myself will surely go out with you also. But the people said, you shall not go out, for if we indeed flee, they will not care about us. Even if half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, now it is better that you be ready to help us from the city. I want you to notice a change here in David. One of the things you want to see is the spiritual growth in David. How did David get into this problem in the first place? He didn't go out to battle, right? At the time of Kings, when they go out to battle, he doesn't go out. This time, what does he say? I'm going to go. And it's only at the behest of the people. And that will be the pattern you're going to see in David's life from this point forward. When the kings go out to battle, David goes, until the day where his hand grows weary when fighting the Philistines, and Joab goes, you're going to die out here. No more doing this. And so basically, David will show this pattern of, I will fight when warriors fight. Which tells you he's learned something, hasn't he? If I'm king, I go with my people. If I command people to go into war, I go into war. I'm not leaving other people to fight my battles. And so it's a cool thing in that kind of spiritual growth of David to see him figure out. Because David at this point is certainly a much older man than when he stayed home from battle and sinned with Bathsheba. So for him to say, no, I will surely go out as well is an impressive thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's not going to actually go out to war. Well, it also highlights the accuracy of Ahithophel's advice, right? Ahithophel was, well, I'll go and strike the king down alone while they haven't had a chance to gather the army. And this is exactly the opposite of what Ahithophel wanted. They're going to have to fight an entire army, and David's not even there. So, yeah, it is. It's an interesting kind of contrast. But what we'll see is you're going to have three commanders, Joab, Abishai, and Ittai. And Joab is going to kind of take the lead in this because that's what Joab does. Joab always sees himself as the leader. And so now we deal with another complicated character. Joab is not driven by revenge. I know that because Joab was on Absalom's side a while back. You remember that? He was the guy who told David, you really ought to have him come back. Joab has been on both sides of this series of events. He has been the guy who David leaned on to kill Uriah. Right? Remember, when Uriah is given a letter to give to the commander so that he will be brought to one of the most dangerous parts of the battle and die, the commander is Joab. And then later on, with Amnon and Tamar, it is Joab that says, no, you need to bring back Absalom. But so he's been on both sides of this. He's been back and forth. But Joab, one thing you will see consistently with Joab over and over and over again, Joab wants to be the guy in charge. And you've seen that all the way back, if you remember when there was civil war, and there was Abner, and Abner was the commander of the army, and David says, we'll have peace with you, you can be the commander, it'll all be fine. What does Joab do to Abner? He kills him. And at least part of that was because Abner had killed his brother, but another part of it is, who's the commander of the army if Abner's not? It's Joab. And when it came time to conquer Jerusalem, And he says, whoever goes up first, I will make commander of the army. Who goes up first? Joab. And now, at the end of all of this, when all of this has gone down and it's all fallen apart and Absalom is dead and all of those different things, Amasa will be forgiven and shown mercy by David. And he'll say, you can come and be the commander of the army. And guess what Joab's going to do to him? He's going to kill him. He's going to whack him. Yeah, that's more like Italian mafia style. I don't know if that's Jewish army as much, but Joab is consistently shown the thing that seems to motivate him is power. Now, people are complicated, and I'm sure it's not just that, but that seems to be the thing that he comes back to over and over again, is he wants to be the commander. He wants to be the guy in the driver's seat. He wants to be the guy in charge. And when you look at him, how much trouble does that get him into? Right? Because he's always going to be chasing power. And you can't trust him. That's one of the things that David will say about him when he talks to his son Solomon. He says, do not let Joab's head go down to the grave in peace. In other words, I haven't ever been able to deal with him. But son, you're going to be king now, and you're going to need to deal with him. Because he's not a trustworthy guy. Because somebody who always chases power is a broken tooth. Right? They're inconsistent. And that's a good reminder to us. One, as you're picking your friends, make sure that your friends are not power-hungry people. And if that's the most important thing to them, they're not really your friends. And two, don't be that person. Check yourself. Because it will ruin your life. Okay, any other comments, thoughts, anything there? Yeah. I agree. Yes. I would agree with that. Yeah, he never seemed to want to be king. That was not important. And you're right, he oftentimes would give David good advice, but it was always in the times where it also lined up with Joab. You know, so he is, I mean, I have it right up there for a reason. He's a complicated character. Sometimes he's right and David's wrong, and if David had listened to him, the census is a great example of that, he would have saved a lot of lives. And so Joab seemed to be aware that I'm not king material, but I want to be this. His kingship, his rule was commander of the army. That seemed to be what he wanted. But you're right, he gave good advice quite a lot. Any other thoughts? Okay. Okay, so now, after this battle, the next thing that we're going to see is they go to battle, and David asks for one thing in this battle, by the way. He's not going to go out himself, but there's one thing that he's concerned about the whole time. What is it? Don't kill Absalom. Don't kill my son. That's the one thing. Well, in the end, Absalom, with the beautiful hair that he had, it gets stuck in the branches of a great oak, which is just a really good reminder that that thing that you take pride in, it might kill you. And so his head in chapter 18 gets caught fast in the oak, so he's left hanging between heaven and earth. And so somebody saw it, and he tells Joab. And Joab immediately says, well, did you kill him? He goes, no, I'm not going to kill him. David said, don't kill him. Joab says, tell me where he is. And then Joab goes and kills him. And so in verse 13, let's see here, down verse 14, Joab said, I will not waste time here with you. So he took 3 spears in his hand, thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men who carried Joab's armor gathered around and struck Absalom and killed him. Now, I will say, to Annette's point, is David seeing clearly about this whole let's keep Absalom alive thing? There's no doubt he isn't, right? Is that going to work? We're going to win this battle, but I'm going to keep Absalom alive. Absolutely not. What happened last time he let Absalom live after he did something worthy of death? He came for the kingdom. And Joab gets that. So Joab is a good right-hand man, especially here, to David. And so he will strike him down and kill him. And I will say this about Joab. He listens to David unless he doesn't feel like it. That would be how I would describe their relationship. He will listen to David unless he doesn't feel like it. And so then verse 16, Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained the people. They took Absalom, cast him into a deep pit in the forest, and erected over him a very great heap of stones, and all Israel fled, each to his tent. Joab does a lot of really wise things here. Once Absalom is dead, he stops the people from continuing to fight. No more bloodshed. Let's stop this. Right? That's a pretty good move, I think. They bury him, and so then from there, they will go back, and as they're coming back into the city victorious, what's David doing? He is mourning. Yeah, this is not victory for David. David is struck with total grief because he's been told, they sent messengers and told him, Absalom is dead. And David is just absolutely grief-stricken over it. And in verse 33 of chapter 18, it says, the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And thus he said as he walked, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son. So, Joab's going to have to fix this because, one, there is a problem. All of these people have risked their lives for David, and he's now lamenting his son. But we're going to look at a couple of different things here. One, as David is lamenting, what does he wish had happened instead? I wish I had died instead. I think that at least in part tells us that David understands why has all this happened. He traces it back to himself. This is a man living with that reality of the things that he should have done differently. And when God said the sword will not depart from your house, he's now having to live with those consequences. And that is not an easy thing to do. Because you and I can sit here analytically, and frankly, I would say to Joab, that's the thing with Joab. Joab's a lot more analytical about this than David is. If you look at it purely analytically, what should happen to Absalom? What do you have to do? You got to kill him. I mean, does anybody else see a pathway other than him dying? It's the only option, right? And it's the one that preserves the most life, because as soon as he kills Absalom, what can Joab then tell the rest of the army? Stop fighting, it's all over, right? Okay, without getting too political, I guess it does get political, you just have to deal with it. Hiroshima, it's the Hiroshima and Nagasaki thing, right? Do we drop the bombs, which are going to kill a lot of people, in the hopes that it will save more people, right? That's what Joab is doing here. We kill one guy, which, by the way, was Ahithophel's advice on the other side, wasn't it? He's like, you just kill the one guy and this whole thing's over. Analytically, that's the right answer. But David is not just an accountant. He's a father. And I think we do well to recognize that God did not just make us as, spiritual bean counters, where we just say, like, this is this thing and then this thing. There's an emotional component to you as a human being. And guess who made that emotional component? Can we agree that God made your emotions? Right? And you have to find a way to work through that. And David is an example of somebody who is complicated because there are bad people in his life, and part of why they're bad is him. I mean, we don't like to say that, but part of why they're bad is him. And he knows it, and he's got to deal with that. So, yeah. Sure. Agreed. And you know what? I bet that killed David. That Absalom turned out to be this wicked, unrepentant guy. And as parents, when your kids are not living as they ought, what do you hope for them? One more day for them to figure it out, right? You just give them one more day to figure it out. I want more time. That's what he wants. When David says, I wish that I had died instead of him, David has already said he knows where he's going when he dies. But Absalom is a whole different thing. And so I don't have any answers with this, and I don't like that. I'm much more of a like, hey, let's teach on this and here's some clear answers. But I guess what I'd say is, look, for those of us who love people who aren't right with God, and sometimes they're not right with God, and part of it is we can look at our own lives and things that we could have or should have said or whatever. You're going to have to find a way to make peace with that, because David had to find a way to make peace with that. Yeah. 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 Oh, absolutely. This is not the only event in that arena of chaos that he has ever since that sin with Bathsheba and Uriah. You're right. So as we look now, Absalom is dead. David is going to be restored as king. We see this in starting in about chapter 19. The restoration process begins. It is a complicated process, this restoration of David to the throne. Right? It's complicated in that God is going to bring him back to Jerusalem, but what's the cost? The initial cost is the death of Absalom, right? That's part of the cost. What is some other cost? It was kingship is going to look different, yeah? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you get the 10 concubines. And by the way, Tamar's still out there living too, right? So yes, absolutely. There's are other impacts there. Yeah. There was a battle. There are people slain on the battlefield from that battle, right? There is a loss of Ahithophel, right? There's no restoration. He was David's greatest counselor, not so much anymore. And then the other thing that you see happening here as David returns is that there's other things that are kind of complicated. For example, you have the Mephibosheth circumstance. If you remember, when David left, Mephibosheth did not go with him. And Ziba, who was caring for all of the estate, said, oh, he stayed in Jerusalem because he's thinks this is going to be the return of his father's kingdom. There is no real data to say that that's true. It seems to be, as you look at the text, leaning more towards Ziba was just lying. And he was finding a way to make a inroad with David. Because what does David end up doing when he hears that news as they're leaving Jerusalem? What does he tell Ziba? Remember? Yeah, I know. I've had the same thing. I can only say his name like 2 or 3 times before I run out of saliva. So yeah, Ziba, he goes, you can have all the land. Well, now as they're coming back, Mephibosheth tells his side of the story, which is another good example. Should we ever make any sort of judgment without hearing both sides of the story? You only hear half the story. That guy's going to sound perfect every time. But Mephibosheth says, no, that was not what happened. Essentially, I would have, but, I can't walk. And I am lame. And because of that, I couldn't come with you, and I've been slandered. And so the end decision by David is to split the land between the two. Now, is that fair? It's not really fair, is it? The only thing that would be fair would be if he got to the bottom of it and figured out who was right and who was wrong. But can David figure that out? It doesn't seem like he can. So he just says, split it. Now, Mephibosheth, for his part, seems to be like, fine, whatever. whatever it, I mean, his words, if he can have all of it. And if he means that, then, that speaks to his character. I will say this, in events like that, where judgment has to be made and you don't have all the facts, it's not going to be necessarily a fair judgment, but who always knows the right answer? God knows the right answer to that, right? So God will sort this stuff out in the end. But things like that happen in the restoration process that are messy. David finds new friends along the way in Barzillai, and he honors him by taking his son back. But there's a whole variety of different things that happen, including as they're on their way back. Remember that guy that was cursing David as they went? How is he on as David's coming back? Oh, I didn't mean it. I'm so sorry. Please don't kill me. Right? I mean, he's groveling the entire time. David shows mercy with some boundaries, but some mercy there. It's interesting to me when you see this restoration of David's kingdom. It's not just we come in, we conquer, we win. There's some forgiveness that needs to happen, and there are some difficult decisions that need to be made, and compromises, and you're having to accept people who were not always the best. I mean, one of the things that happens is that David takes Amasa and puts him in command of the army. Well, Amasa was on the other side. Why would you do that? Why would David possibly put a guy in charge of the military that had been on the other side? Why would you do that? What? Yeah, you win the heart of Absalom's people. There's some compromise for others, right? You're thinking about it. I think if you've read any biographies about Abraham Lincoln, that was one of the things that was so impressive about him, was he would put people in his cabinet who hated his guts. And it worked because he got good advice from him, because they were unafraid to tell him he was wrong, since that was pretty much their lifestyle. And two, it made people realize this is a guy who will work with others. This is a reconciling David that we're seeing. And that's I think, some spiritual growth in him. So as we get here to this period of David's life where now he is being restored to the kingdom, you see a fuller David. Not just a David who can kill Goliath, but a David who can forgive. A David who can reconcile people. A David who has a heart for both his friends and his enemies. And I think that's spiritual growth, but certainly messy. Anybody have any comments or questions or thoughts before we shut down? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's a great point. I mean, you take putting Amasa in there. I mean, he's certainly inner circle at that point. If that guy wanted to betray you, he would have a lot of opportunity to. You're sticking your neck out there. You have to have some maturity to do that, and some trust in God. If God's brought me back, then so all that. You have a great point. Any other thoughts? Okay, so we will close up there, and we'll look at kind of finishing out David's life next week, and then the week after that I'll be gone, and Steve will be covering one of the Psalms that actually shows up in 2 Samuel. So thank you all so much.